I'm part of the planning team. We have a nice full house, but there are plenty of seats, so just come on up. I want to say two things. One, this session is being video recorded, and it, along with all of the keynotes, will be made available later online. Also, please, please, please fill out the survey for this session, the other sessions, and the conference. The planning team absolutely reads all of the feedback. We make changes. Last year, someone said to me, this conference has been amazing. My heart is full. My mind is full. I have no sermon for Sunday. Can you please provide something? You have all of these resources. So this morning, we had an 8 a.m. session with Lisa Cressman from Backstory Preaching on Sunday sermon prep. So that idea came directly from one person's plea. So please, please give us your feedback. We really do incorporate it. And without further ado, I would like to welcome, needing no introduction, the Bishop Andy Doyle, Bishop of Texas.
Thank you. So let me just go through our panelists really quick and introduce them to you. First, we have Courtney, who is the ED of the Society for the Increase of Ministry, a GTS grad. You were hosting, you were hosting the Archbishop during 9/11, a very powerful spiritual moment for you, and one that, if you're interested, I think really helped, according to you, formed much of how you approach things. And which led you to the work in disaster response, and then to the director of congregational learning in Atlanta. And what I find really interesting about your own career is this ministry of innovation, leadership, and evangelism. That's all part of that. And I enjoyed reading about you. I would characterize your how as faithful, deep spiritual practice springs innovative, culturally diverse outward engagement. How
That's
about that?
fantastic.
Is that good?
Thank you.
And your what? So how you do, your what is that you transform the leadership of the Episcopal Church through recruitment and deep theological training. Did I do pretty good?
Yes.
Yeah?
Thank you. Those are definitely my passions.
Yeah. You also like sunset pictures on your Facebook. And I don't understand chocolate mice, but they looked yummy. Are they actually chocolate?
They are, and they're at a famous bakery next to General Seminary called La Bergamo.
Okay, yes. Well, when I visit, I'm going to have chocolate mice because of your Facebook. And you dream of having Rowan Atkinson read the Bible in 72 hours. So this is going to be, it's great to have you. Could we have a little bit of applause for Courtney? Some of you don't know Alec, who's next to Courtney here to my left, and I've gotten to know Alec online. So this is our first in-person, real, substantive presence together. He is working with Casper Tucurel on the Nearness Project. He is a Princeton grad, a Fulbright Fellow, a regular contributor to Cosmos, the Cosmos Journal. You do that too, don't you, Mark?
I write, but not in Cosmos.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go. We're going to get to you in a second. Review of books, present working with the Nearness, as I said, and your work of building spiritual connective tissue between people has been featured in both BBC and The Atlantic. So people are recognizing this kind of way of connecting that you have as a gift, and you bring it to us today. Your how might be explorative conversations with people regarding meaning. And your what would be facilitating small group conversations for people who are trying to navigate life. Right? Did I do pretty good on that? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, how about this? You're writing a novel, right? And how far are we on the novel?
The novel is complete.
It's complete, and is there a protagonist?
There sure is.
And
That's
who?
how they tend to work.
Yes, it is right, exactly. So who is this protagonist?
I'll tell you about it another time.
Okay. I would like to also say congratulations. I think there's a new person in your life.
Oh, my God.
That's
not
right.
only
And who
that-
is it? No, I don't know
Oh,
that
my
part. I've just been told that there's a
No.
new person.
Not only that, her aunt happens to be in the room.
No.
In a matter of, let's say, 50 minutes, her entire family will know that the Bishop of Texas announced to a ballroom full of people that there's someone in my life.
That's right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I just wanted to take that off your plate.
Yeah.
And
Try to find
the
out
next
the right
thing.
time to do it. You know.
But listen, it is. I'm pastoral, right, Jim? I'm pastoral. But here's the thing everybody in this room needs to know. If he tells you, hey, I've played ping pong a little bit, he's lying. He is a ping pong wizard and rules the table. So it's great to have you with us. Would you all welcome Alec? Great to have you with us. You have failed retirement. It's amazing. Education is DePaul, Oxford University, Nashotah House, Christian Theological Seminary. You previously Urban Parish and Cathedral Service, Dean and President, Seabury Western, Director Mission for Tech. It goes on. There were so many leadership roles in tech. I just wrote the Episcopal Church leadership. That's just all I wrote. He is here encapsulating all of that in one person. He spent his time on congregational vitality, as many of you know, leadership development, and spiritual, the mission that's deeply rooted in spirituality, author of several books. I would characterize your how as to affect vitally in the Episcopal Church a leadership growth and development which is focused on mission. And I would say your what is that you believe that through the Episcopal Church and its ministry, both parochial and theological education, seminary, and programmatically, that there is a possibility for us to enliven conversation for the future.
That sounds absolutely creedal, Bishop.
Thank you. Thank you. You are a musician, and you play several instruments, but I want to know, what's your favorite thing to play on the piano? You sit down, you're just going to just play. What is that?
It depends on my mood. It can be some nice classical literature sort of stuff in that sort of way. I, through my years, always said if the priesthood thing didn't work out, I was going to go back to bar rooms and play the piano there on jazz.
Yeah.
And I love playing jazz.
Yeah, jazz. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And you really are channeling Billy Joel right now. So
I am.
thank you.
I hope that's evident.
That's evident to all of us.
My Billy
And
Joel imitation is pretty...
the best thing that I love, though, is that you're an obnoxious grandparent, and I'm hoping that I'll get to see kid pics before we leave today. How about a big hand of applause for that, for Jim? Mark Grayson is with us. He welcome back to Texas from St. Stephen's Episcopal School, where
That's
you
right.
were a school brat, you said, but you eventually
Definitely a brat.
made it outside to Harvard and Columbia, and you led all kinds of minds and founded Rocket 21, which are kind of amazing feats all on their own. But currently, you are the founding director of Trinity Spiritual Center Southport and a regular featured columnist in the Good Men Project.
That's right.
Yes. And what I love is the approach to discussing masculinity without toxicity. That seems to be at the core of your writing. And I was thinking about your how is to provide a safe place today, to provide a safe place for nuns for exploration beyond denominational boundaries.
That sounds right.
I'm doing good?
Yeah, you're doing
and
great.
your what is curating space for contemplation, lectures, and meditation. That's where that takes place.
Spot on.
Yeah, okay. Now, what they don't know is that you are a lover of music.
Yes.
Yes, and you had a dog that ate arugula. Is that true?
And cauliflower.
And cauliflower. And is that dog still?
With us?
Yes.
Yes.
It is.
She's a rambunctious Havanese.
That's because of what? That's because
She's well fed.
That's right. That's what I'm saying.
140 years old and dog.
It's right. 104. And you have a signed photo of a picture of you and one of our favorite governors, Ann Richards.
I went to school with her daughter, Cecile.
Ah, my
So
gosh.
I was a regular in the pool.
And you are a maker of sweet rolls.
That I am.
All right. Would you all welcome Mark? Okay, so first question for all of you. I have played a little bit with, the Simon Sinek why, how, and what. And so I've given you already the how and what. But I think it's very important as we begin a discussion for why church. I would love for you to speak just briefly on why. Why? Why do you do the things that you do? Why? What has captured your heart for this ministry in such a way that you have to do it?
So I guess I get to go first.
Yes, you do.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the 9/11 experience
Yeah.
for me, and I would say that followed by the Katrina experience were really big kind of formative events in my life. And the reason was that I watched the church get converted to become itself in both of those circumstances. And it was so inspiring to see what can happen when faith is kind of unleashed. And so a lot of my passion about why church has to do with unleashing people's creativity, really, their spiritual creativity. And also just watching how deeply and utterly transformative it is when people are genuinely a part of a community that is truly experiencing and sharing God's love. And so for me, trying to empower people, equip people to form communities like that of all kinds, often non-traditional, is just really exciting to me.
Thank you. Jim, how about you? What's your why?
Well, the why church is also why gospel, why God's love, why mission in that way. Early on in my ministry, and I was ordained when I was 12, which is how I did all this stuff. I'm 70 now. But in those days, that was done in the church. I, much to my surprise, became just utterly convinced of the power of communities of faith, congregations, and of you all, leaders of communities of faith, and what that would mean. So the why for me is how communities and leaders intersect, and there's a problem in that. Not so much, you all are passionate, hardworking, committed leaders. And the congregations that you serve are those that are growing. That's one of the reasons, literally 40 years ago, that we started this organization called now EPN. I finally used the right, is Joe in the room? I finally use the right name all the time.
You're getting another badge for that.
That's right. Well, I know. And, but I think that we tend to define church a little in too narrow a way. That's the other part of this here. Where, yes, we keep track of average Sunday attendance and baptisms and all of that good stuff. We care deeply about these communities that we serve. But God is defining that more broadly. So that many years ago, and we were doing work in the Diocese of Texas as well as in Evanston, Illinois, where Seabury Western was located, the founder of the Seabury Institute, one of our groups, Arlen Rothage, isn't that a great name? Arlen, who was a wonderful guy, came up with a technology called parallel development that congregations could do something focusing on the energy of their life together, and that there was a whole universe of possibility of parallel work in communities that are a part of that. And many of you in this room and your congregations do that, and I think that's one of the edges of the future to answer that question and lean into that question of why we are a church in a very broad and zesty and growing sense.
Thank you. what I love about this panel is that we've got some people who are deep within this tradition in powerful leadership ways. But Mark, you push the edges of this, and with what I would consider real powerful results for the individuals who are engaging with one another through your kind of what you've been given grace over. So talk a little bit about the why that you bring to this conversation, kind of in this post-denominational or outside of those denominational boundaries.
So I think there's two levels of answers to this question. And the first level is that I actually didn't have a choice. And, you know, I tried and tried and tried actually to walk away from doing this kind of work. But from a very early age, I kept having all these weird experiences that I couldn't explain. And growing up in an Episcopal boarding school that was primarily boarding at the time, I was completely surrounded by teachers and priests. And I knew when I graduated from college that if there was one thing I was going to do, it was not be a teacher and a priest. And the question arose repeatedly, oh, you would be the perfect priest. You'd be the perfect teacher. I'm like, there's no way I'm doing that. And one thing that I've learned over the years is that every time I say no to God, the answer is yes. It's just taking me a long time to figure that out. And so the second level of answer to this is that because of all those experiences as a child, and also because how I'm wired as a person, I love stories. And more than anything else in life, I love to just sit and listen to people's stories. And what happened to me was that as I progressed through life, even as I was an advertising executive and a nonprofit executive for Chuck Schwab and everything, I was getting the opportunity to hear people's stories, their trauma, their pain, their joy. You know, I used to joke that I'm actually a ghetto priest and I'm serving all these people who are spiritually impoverished. Well, guess what? That's exactly what I'm doing right now. And, you know, that there's a bunch of people out there who have decided that church is not for them. And so it's, you know, somehow we arrived at this moment where, as I sat on the vestry, and that's a long story. You can imagine how long it took God to get me on the vestry. I said no for 20 years, and then finally yes. But I just, you know, we came up with this idea of creating a church for people who don't want to go to church. And that's kind of why I'm here.
Yeah.
It's really working. We've had these amazing experiences, learning opportunities for people. And the weirdest thing is that in getting people to show up, not for church, they're taking a short walk down the ambulatory into the sanctuary and joining us on Sundays. So it's been an and I keep saying it's almost like talking to 2-year-olds. You know, the more that you tell them no, the more they do what you say. So it's, and I don't mean to diminish by any means, none. So please don't take it that way. But the more I say we're not proselytizing, the more apparent it becomes that people are finding their way.
Thank you. Thank you. Alec, this Nearness Project is amazing in the fact that it brings people together who might not normally be together and is creating a space that is different than physically being present, but actually being present in a new way. And not unlike Mark, you're getting to be a part of people's stories and their pilgrimage and a really broad conversation. So tell us a little bit about your why.
Thank you. Tell if my mic is on. Does it seem to be working? No. I appreciate it. Thank you. How's that? Okay. So I grew up in an atheist Jewish family. Didn't even have a bar mitzvah because it conflicted with basketball practice. Religion really was not part of the picture. My parents went through a divorce. I, like a lot of people in my generation, had mental health challenges and longed for a depth of resource that contemporary therapy culture couldn't provide. I had spiritual longings, and I didn't know how to meet them. Studied religion as an undergrad, spent a year living at a large community for people with intellectual disabilities, sort of got into my bones what spiritual community at its best could be, mutual vulnerability, non-performative, non-sentimental care. And the short of it is that I knew that there were a lot of people like me out in the world, and I wanted to try to create something that could help them.
Yeah. And let me go, so I want to go to the next question, but I want to start with you, because I think this L'Arche, as I read through some of your work, and I think this gets us to a different place in this conversation, which is so often we come into these panel rooms, and we're looking for the program, we're looking for the fix. But what you said that really caught my attention was non-sentimental community. Could you put some words around that in terms of what you saw in the L'Arche community that you think we all might benefit from?
Sure. And I could talk at length about this. We'll try to keep it
Can we put
short.
our mics closer to the mouth? I think people are
Yeah.
having
Of course.
trouble hearing
Okay.
us. Yeah.
Is that good?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I could speak at some length about that. I think, in short, I grew up in a culture of strivers, successful people, undergrad at Princeton, wanting to save the world, do dramatic things, and part of the beauty of the community where I lived was cherishing the sacredness of the small, the passage in Matthew 25, famous but often misquoted. Jesus is saying, you fed the naked, clothed
Right.
clothed the naked, blah, blah, blah. And, people often remember it as when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me.
Right.
But in fact, when you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me. And it was not sentimental in the sense that it wasn't going for big emotions in front of a big audience, trying to do dramatic, sweeping things, but instead just small gestures of service and sacrifice.
Thank you. So Courtney, coming to you. Yeah, right? Like we could just stop there and be quiet for 20 minutes, couldn't we? Tell me about one of the least of these in your Katrina experience, and how did that help you see something different about what the church could be in the future? There's probably 1,000. You just have to pick one.
I remember the challenges that were facing children in Treme specifically, which is where I lived when I was in New Orleans. And right behind John Mack, which was one of the big recovery schools, they had 800 students, 11 teachers, and 25 security guards at that school.
Oh my gosh.
And right behind the school was St. Luke's, which is the historically black congregation in the Episcopal Church in New Orleans. And I remember meeting these children who had been stranded on rooftops and abandoned, separated from their families, who came back because they wanted to be with their friends, but they weren't with their parents, and they were squatting in gutted houses to live. And we made a place for the children in the school at the church, and just created an environment where they were supported, and they became real activists for their own situation. And we did a lot of community organizing training with the kids. And I remember a special needs boy named Floyd, who was chosen to make the presentation to the governor of Louisiana about their situation. And I just remember us supporting him, coaching him, helping him, and then him standing in the governor's mansion and making his case to the governor. It was so incredibly moving. And it was just that personal relationship with him and surrounding him that was, it was life-changing for everyone who came in contact with him. And that's, I mean, that's just off the cuff, one of a million stories of how the church surrounded people in very personal ways and made a difference.
Thank you. Thank you. Jim, so you and I and many in this room have traveled the belief that structure could save us and programs could save us, and if we could just figure out what the right thing to do, we would all be okay. Now tell me, is there a moment in your own spiritual kind of formative work with people that where you thought, wait, it's deeper than this?
Yes, indeed. In fact, maybe that's been the largest and most significant part of my spiritual growth as someone who's been able to nurture communities and leaders of communities and shape some people to do this kind of ministry. Yeah, I think structure is important. You know, that God framed things, God structured things from the beginning of creation on. But leadership and life is a matter, and faith are matters of the heart. And my journey has been that of discovering the heart, my own heart, in many ways, but also the hearts of people who lead congregations, the hearts of, it's very interesting, the thematic things, Mark, that you have done with the Spiritual Center, and I've had the honor of being consulting in some ways to that and learning a lot about it in that way. All of the themes that you've done go smack dab, full speed ahead into the heart. And the heart is what is allowing people who, you know, some are members of Trinity Church, but a lot of them are these nuns. You know, I grew up in a high church part of the Episcopal Church, so I still think of women in black and, you know, with a headdress on. But I'm disciplined in that, learning that too. You can see that when you do things and have God bringing the vistas of your context and your community there, how all of this is a real matter of the heart. And the hearts around themes of life and death, around forgiveness, around when I was loved and when I was dropped in love, about trust, that's where I believe God is using some structures, some frameworks, some resources. My retirement job is being the president of a philanthropic foundation that came out of a guy who was just a generous Episcopalian and left a lot of money to do work in arts and culture, but I'm discovering every day that's all about heart too as well. So what are we doing? What am I doing in the work that I do in various arenas in order to nurture my own heart and to see and connect with the hearts of others who are seeking and searching and loving themselves?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great moment to move to Mark and ask you, Mark, in your experience, and I do have a sense that we are fumbling towards this as an organization, but tell us about these hearts that you're coming into contact with and their search for the divine. And what does that look like?
Yeah, that probably is the final answer on why I do this, because my own experience and the stories that I hear from others absolutely convinces me that there is a deep hunger within all of us for some kind of experience, some kind of connection with the transcendent, both within us and the world around us and in the absolute. And people don't really have the language to express that idea anymore because we're so unchurched, some of us. But it is absolutely core to our being, to our humanity, that we are looking for these kinds of connections. And I think all too often we settle for intellectual abstractions as to what that might look like. And what the community that we've put together is doing is actually creating experiences where we are able to, I hope, encounter the actual heart-centered experience of being connected in that way. Last weekend we had Mpa Tutu van Furth over from Amsterdam to sit with us for the weekend. And there was plenty of evidence that the Spirit was on the move. We had a dinner the Friday night that a ton of people showed up for, and I was kind of surprised by that. At the end of the dinner, I had a bunch of people come up to me and say, you know, that was so fabulous. Can I come to the workshop the next day? And they hadn't signed up. So that, and by the way, only a quarter, maybe 20% of the people in the room on Friday night and Saturday were parishioners. The next thing I knew, I was falling apart, honestly, crying at the end of the workshop because the sense of being connected that Mpa had created for us within the 5 hours that she was with us was palpable. I mean, you literally physically could feel it. And then, to my utter surprise, all these people who are not parishioners showed up at church. So it was like Christmas. We were filled to the rafters to hear her preach. So it's only one data point, but in fact, we've done 30 of these now. And every time there are these surprising moments. I was saying to Jim this morning, the great thing about the center, oops, am I still not close enough? Can you hear me?
You're good. Yeah.
Okay. The great thing about the center, and for me, is that I get to open the door. That's all I'm doing. I get these people to come and make a plan. And guess what? Something entirely different happens than what I've planned. It's way better. And that, too, has been, for me, evidence that the Spirit is deepening our inner capacities so that we are better able to build community and become a force for good and become active in the world to the benefit of others.
Thank you. What are you seeing, Alec, when you do these nearness groups? And you might want to just share a little bit about what they do, because it's very similar. But what I'm specifically looking for here, just to say, because I'm interested in this, is I think there are a lot of people who would just say, well, that's online. That's not real. But there is something deeply, as you point out, Mark, if we engage this spirituality seriously at a very deep level, there is a physical thing that's happening to us. And so even if we're online, there are physical things happening in very positive ways. So talk a little bit about your experience. What you're seeing, what are people hungering for?
Absolutely. So first, just by way of background, what we do is we create peer-facilitated, structured small groups. And I'm in a group. There's a former Catholic woman in Germany, a Jewish man in Chicago, 2 ex-evangelicals, one in British Columbia, one in Denver, and a sort of tarot-practicing woman in England. And in terms of what makes it tangible, I mean, we love each other. And that expresses itself, 8 months ago, I go through a breakup. I get a letter from Germany, a letter from England. Someone has a child, we're there. The 2 other parents in the group are helping them through it. People share their griefs, share what's on their heart in a really beautiful, caring way. Another thing I'll say is, we started this to create small groups for religiously unaffiliated people. A couple strange things started to happen.
Right.
We had over 1,000 people through the program, and we started to hear from people that they were going after 6 months, 8 months, a year in nearness and becoming members of their local religious congregations. They'd seen what spiritual community could be, and they wanted a richer version of it in person and in a tradition. The second thing that we noticed is that it was a digital complement to people's IRL spiritual lives. There were religious people showing up. There were clergy showing up. Yeah. That was something that surprised us. Clergy who were lacking structures of peer support. Clergy who wanted a space where instead of giving, they could receive. Clergy who wanted a place where they could work out issues of their spirituality that they wouldn't feel comfortable working out in a public forum in front of their parishioners. I could say more, but that's,
Yeah, but I think that brings us to you, right? So you're in this conversation about leadership and growing leadership, deep theological conversation. How does that fit with what you're doing and how you're seeing this come alive right now and this kind of new space that we're entering?
Well, I've been really excited to meet you, Alec, because listening to what you're saying resonates so much with what we're experiencing too, and some of the things that we're experimenting with. So there's an online community that's coming together for daily practice from noon to 1 o'clock every day during the week called Become All Flame. And it's we're engaging centering reflections, story prompts, self-awakening questions, having these deep conversations together, creating with like Google Jamboard these word clouds where we can look at sort of how we feel like the Spirit is speaking to us together online. And it has become a profound community. And, my dad died in September. One of the people in the group who I did not know otherwise, I got to the funeral, and he was sitting in the back pew with a rose waiting for me. And, you see how another member, her husband died very suddenly, and the kind of pastoral care and community that is forming among people who come together is profound. And the other thing, I just was talking to somebody else about this last night, the idea that you can't be formed by a practice that takes place in a virtual space, I think is really not correct. That's not been my experience. Because it takes a lot of discipline to show up for a daily practice online, just like it does, to show up at church or wherever. And it really does the repetition, the discipline, the accountability and community. I think the ritual of it, which I think is a big part of your work, the way that it's sanctifying time. All of these, to me, are just really rich and surprising new discoveries for me, because this is a whole new world for me. And I found it to be exciting and hopeful. And then, the other stuff that we're doing, we're also trying to train, provide a kind of framework and training for people that's going to be offered for Province 4 for free from a Trinity grant that we got through the Diocese of Atlanta. It's called Kindle Holy Change. And it's about equipping people who'd like to start communities like this with some tools and a framework to be able to start their own. And we're focusing this particularly on resourcing small congregations who are having to look for new models of being church, with some tools that can help them reimagine, what their congregation can be. And so, again, just to see the passion of people's callings, their devotion, their inspiration, their creativity, their commitment. I think there can be an explosion of this across the church if we equip people and free them to do it.
Yeah, we had a priest that once wrote that God has a leaky church. Thank goodness. And that what you're we find these people who are on these journeys. It's not as if God's not already in their life. It's not that the church actually has something to offer them they don't have in this kind of spiritual journey, but rather that we're lacking the spaces, and so the church is leaking out into these online and retreats and everything else, because on Sunday morning there's not time to offer that, and people are living these busy lives. So I'm interested, Jim, how do you see this like folding in? You've been so focused on empowering laity and seeing the possibilities and the incredible locked value of spiritual treasure in congregations. Talk a little bit about how you see this playing out right now.
Right, and thank you for using that word empower, because I want to do what seems a dichotomy, but it's not, and that is about empowerment and anxiety. And you don't have to raise your hands. I'm not going to ask the question, have you ever felt anxious in your congregational leadership?
That's
Please
right.
don't bother with that right now.
I feel anxious
The
right
wind
now
would
just
go-
asking
Do I feel
a
anxious
question.
right now? You know, I one time asked a New Testament professor to find out if Jesus actually said, if there was a text, an ancient text where Jesus says, when 2 or 3 are gathered together, I'm in the midst. I was sure that he also said, where 2 or 3 are gathered together, you've got some anxiety on your hands. And this is an anxious time in the world. It's a VUCA world, as they say, volatility and all that stuff, and it is an anxious time in the Episcopal Church. I think you, as the House of Bishops, recently talked about possibility and empowerment and anxiety, and, we talk about the decline in the church, blah, 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 blah. All of that is true, and again, it's about statistics more than it is spirit in so many ways. So, how then do we acknowledge? I remember Parker Palmer one time said, it isn't that you don't have to be afraid, it's just that you don't have to let fear dominate your soul.
Right.
How do we acknowledge the truth of the anxieties we feel and grow into that next stage of empowerment? In one of the Lilly Endowment research things, and I still remain, that's a different foundation. I'm not the president of you hear that in Indianapolis? I am not the president of the Lilly Endowment, but of the Alan Cluse Foundation. The University of Seattle did this research on resilient leaders, and particularly resilient clergy leaders, which is what you were just saying about the ordained person who was saying, I can't talk about my anxiety, But what they found were there were 3 P's that made all the difference: peers, practices, and purpose. And that resilient leaders dove in to their peers, to their community, to the practices, the kind of practices both of you have been talking about in the practice of learning and openness to the Spirit that the Spiritual Center is doing, and really connecting that then to purpose. What am I called to be? How am I empowered by God to live into who and what I am called to be? And my learning is that those 3 areas can be also attached to the context in which your parish finds itself. Looking at the community that you are, looking at the way you use your buildings. Thank God for the Partnership for Sacred Places that we've all heard some of that about today. To see how God is empowering us to open our eyes to those 3 dimensions of our life. And the people who come to Trinity Southport, Connecticut's Spiritual Center are bringing those 3 questions with them as well. How do I have community? What is my meaning? And there's this transcendent power related to my call and to my meaning. And also then, what are the practices? What are steps day by day that I can do that will make meaning in my life?
I want to talk about that transformation piece. And Mark, you bring some of this to us, and then Alec, you do too from a different angle. But as I listen to you describe some of your experience, I'm not going to be a priest, I'm not going to be a teacher, right? And then we joked about being on the vestry. There must have been some wrestling or a moment where you envisioned that the church could be something different. So there must have been some. How did that change happen for you, where the old paradigms began to fade?
I really need to be serious. I want to say it already was happening for me, because I was going to church and I would tell our rector, whom I just love, if you knew what I was actually doing in my head as I'm in church, you'd excommunicate me, because I am completely. I've had a long meditation practice going back to my college days. Right. I'm in this space where I understand that the living word is going to show up with exactly what I need to hear every single time I show up. There were just a lot of things that, through just living, I had experienced and learned, and that shaped my understanding of what church actually is. Now, I know that that's weird, but I love all the ritual and all the singing and all that. So what I was thinking as we were developing the center was, well, what if we just did create a space where that thing that I do at church is what we do in that space,
Right.
and just give people the opportunity, hold open the space where they can really bring whoever they are that day on their spiritual journey, and then trust that the Spirit will show up and give them what they need in the experiences. We have a double helix. It's contemplative practice and then contemporary issues that demand our urgent attention. And we sort of toggle back and forth between those month to month. And what's happened is that people somehow find themselves and community in the creation of that space. It's exactly the way church works. At least it does for me, by showing up at church. It's without all the liturgy, and some of the other elements. But then people find, oh, if that's what church is, maybe I'll go down the hall and I'll finally get what the liturgy and the songs are all about too. I mean, it's an interesting flip of the coin, I think.
No, I mean, it is a doorway, right? I mean, it is in some ways you've been fortunate to receive people who open doors for those opportunities, so that somebody must have said at some point, yeah, let's try that.
And I think another point that I just want to underscore that Alec made was that, it's for the congregants, if we can call them that. But I think it's all right for me to share. I got the sweetest note from Paul when she landed in Amsterdam. She said, I know you think that I was the one who was actually bringing to you these gifts, but I just want you to know that I was nourished and fed by the experience and I think resiliency for leaders is a huge issue. I've watched it in my own stepdad and others who are priests, and I just think that it's really important to acknowledge that we all need these kinds of spaces.
And you're holding that, in the nearness work, Alec, in some way. I really like the image of holding space. We're holding space right now to be together. And I'm curious as you look at, you come at it from a different perspective because of your own narrative and journey. How do you see the things looking into that, like looking down the hall, as Mark imagined, and you're seeing people who come from all these different contexts? What do you think the church must hold on to in order to be open to this? And what do we have to let go of as you're journeying with all of these different types of folks?
Thank you for the question. It's not for me to say as an outsider what the church should let go of, but I can say a few things. One, I think, is your innovative leadership reflects. We have to try new modes of engaging with people, new points of entry into their spiritual lives, new technologies. The point is not to be faithful to modes of practice, it's to be faithful to God. And that certainly. I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's perfectly, you're here, so I just wanted to affirm that it's okay for you to say whatever you want.
Great.
Whatever you want. So just to
Well,
make sure.
then, in
yeah,
that
exactly.
case.
In that case, hey, I've got my list right here. So I was thinking this is a complete bishop-y question for you, okay? But all of us in this room are doorkeepers for this work. And there are roles that different ones of us inhabit, whether it's a member of a congregation, a community, whether we are priests, bishops. All of those roles have different. How do we lead through this where we do hold the deepest parts of the faith, but we also give room, Courtney, for flourishing in this new space? What do you think?
Well, I think part of it is very simple. And in my experience, I mean, the gatekeepers play a really important role. And in the context of, a disaster where, the world looks one way one day, and then without any notice whatsoever, the world looks completely different the next day, which in some ways is not totally unlike where we are right now. And nobody knows the way forward. Nobody has the answers. But people do step forward and say, I have an idea. I feel like, I feel like I could bring something to the situation. And the most important thing the gatekeeper can do is say yes. I mean, just say yes. Just say, give it a try. Right. It may not work, but that's okay. And that it was really that method that, like, hundreds of new ministries were born by, complete strangers who showed up on the door at St. Paul's Chapel in New York at Ground Zero. That was the way it happened. It was literally, we just trusted people were genuine in their sense of calling, and we said, if that's what's on your heart, bless you, go do it. Let's see if it'll work. It was that easy. And the same thing happened again, in Louisiana. And people who are now, I think of somebody like Katie Mears at ERD, who came and showed up on the doorstep. She was a college student, and she said, I've got a vision for how to create a house gutting, ministry across the city, and I want to run it. And I'm not a church person, and I grew up an Episcopalian, but I'm not very close to the church. But this is what I feel compelled to do. Will you give me a chance, And for Bishop Jenkins to say yes, and then look what happened.
Right.
And look what happened to her life,
And the rest of the church.
And the rest of the church. So
Right. The gift that she became.
Sometimes it can be that simple.
Yeah, thank you. Jim, I had a priest in part of our diocese, and he had opened up the church. They were doing some evangelism, just trying to welcome everybody they could welcome. And there was a young man who came to be a part of that church and participate in that. And he said, I'm really feeling called. There's a community in this town that isn't reached by churches, and most of them have been kicked out. It's LGBTQ community. He said, I really feel called to start a small group and maybe a missional community that's not here at the church, but create some of this open space for people who can't find a home. And the priest said, he called me. He said, "What am I supposed to do?" I just listened to him. He talked about it. I'm just not sure even know what I think about any of this. And I said, "Well, what do you feel?" He said, "I feel like I should say yes." And I said, "Well, then why don't you worry about figuring out as you go and say yes?" What I'm curious about, Jim, help us to see that challenge for us to say yes to this new moment, because we've all been through a crisis and we're somewhat stuck, I think, in COVID. Doesn't mean that we're not still dealing with it or that it's not present in our city. That's not what I'm saying. But we had this traumatic event for our people and the people around us. How do we, as we heal ourselves with God's grace and mercy and practice, how do we become open again to saying yes, Jim?
It has a lot to do with opening those doors, or to use another image that we pray in morning prayer a lot, a collect that starts out, Lord Jesus Christ, you stretched out your arms on the hardwood of the cross, that everyone may come within your reaching, your saving embrace. I mean, that's our mission. That's our possibility to take steps beyond what we think our capacity is, but God is always doing that capacity building in that way. I think that a perfect storm of things came for institutions, all kinds of institutions. I spend my daily life now more with arts institutions. You know what that was like in your towns and your cities for arts institutions during that couldn't do performances, that couldn't have people into their exhibits. So, I mean, does that sound familiar to your church?
Yeah.
You know, so now, how do we believe that arms are open, doors are open? As one person who had a lot of foibles wrote a few years ago, thinking about those doors being open, he said, God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. Huh? God's grace can make us open in that way. I think the first part of that is before the doors are open, the eyes need to be open. Which is resurrection life. Look at all the resurrection narratives, huh? You know, their eyes are closed essentially. Who is this guy walking with us? Who is this guy eating fish with us? Who's that, you know? And then their eyes are open to do that. The first part is the work of looking and seeing. I mean, that's what you did so superbly, both in the 9/11 circumstance, and I'll never forget those visits to New Orleans with you. It was opening the eyes after trauma to see what was possible in that way. So you have an eye-opener guy who comes up and says, you know, there's a community right around us here that needs to be welcomed into its existence and its fullness of grace. And that's what we can do. If we open our eyes not only to see what's happening within our own community, our own congregation, our own leadership, our own hearts, then that becomes a pattern to open the eyes to see what's happening outside. And that's one of the things we're best at the Episcopal Church, huh? That we know how, and we do, and we have generations of practice about opening eyes, seeing things, and then welcoming in that way. But we have to grasp onto the sufficiency of the grace and the love of God.
Thank you. Now, you all have let me hold this space and converse. All I want to do is just like, could they bring us lunch now, and we're going to sit at a table and keep talking. That's what I want to do. This has been amazing. And in some ways, I feel like time and space has stopped a little bit while we could be together, and how grateful I am for that. So I'm going to ask you, as I promised, one question for each of you to answer. And we'll start with Courtney, and then I'm going to do rapid-fire questions, and then we're going to ask everybody to give thanks to God for our time together, all right? So, Courtney, you have a room filled with leaders in this church. They are listening. Tell them what you want them to hear. One thing.
I want to say that I believe this could be a good time. And that I truly believe that the resource of our faith and our relationship with God gives us everything that we need if we're listening and our hearts are open. And I know we are. And I just have a great sense of hope about this coming General Convention and this next little stage of our journey together as the church.
Thank you. Alec, what do you think? One thing. We're all listening. No pressure.
Of course. I'd echo what was just said. Stanley Hauerwas, a hero of mine, said in an interview that God is making the church leaner, as if it weren't necessarily a horrible thing. It's a fact of reality. And I suppose in this shifting religious landscape, I run a business. I should, in theory, be thinking about reaching as many people as possible, growing. And instead, I'm relaxing into what I mentioned before, the sacredness of smallness, and following God insofar as I'm able to see God wherever it takes me.
Thank you. Jim?
An empowerment dual phrase. Maybe triple phrase. I'm going to be Trinitarian.
It's okay.
God can do it. We can do it. God is empowering us to do it.
Mm.
Tough to go last. I think I would say don't be afraid. This is one of the most exciting times to be who you are. Religion tends to change in 500-year cycles. We are going through and into a new cycle now. The Reformation that is occurring is setting the forms that we will very much enjoy for generations to come, and we should have fun doing it.
Speaking of fun, what's your favorite word?
Creativity.
Jim, what's your least favorite word?
You're tricky.
I am. You were thinking I was asking something else. What's your least favorite word?
That's a tough one. My least favorite word is boring.
Thank you. Alec, what excites you the most?
Opening a great book, page 1.
Courtney, what bums you out?
Naysayers.
Mark, what's your favorite curse word?
Oh, my.
Mark, whisper it to us if we can all say it together.
Damn it.
You can do better than that. That's so good. It's okay. It's all right. No, we don't. Yeah, all of us have our grandmother in the back going, "Don't say it." Okay, Jim. What sound do you love to hear?
Children's voices.
Thank you, Alec. What sound do you not like to hear?
Where do I begin? Like squishy bath mat sound, like that
Awesome.
faint.
It's best. Okay, what profession would you love to have other than what you're doing right now?
I'd love to be an artist.
Okay. Mark, what profession would you not want to have? And not naming the two you already said.
That's right.
Being an investment banker.
Okay, thank you. Now, question for all of you. We're going to come back to Courtney as we end. What do you want to hear when you enter Heaven's Gate?
That transcendent sound of joy.
Alec?
With deference to the fact that whatever lies beyond this life
Yes,
transcends
yes,
my
of course.
understanding.
Of course. We assume that. We assume that. My brother.
My grandmother's voice would not be a bad place to start.
Your grandmother's voice. Wow. Thank you. Jim?
Welcome home.
Mark?
Etta James singing at last.
I knew you'd bring it at the end.
That's right.
Awesome. Thank you all. Don't forget to do your surveys. Give him a round of applause for putting up with me. Thank you all for being here.